Welcome to this episode of the Law of Relevancy podcast. Today, we're joined by Jonathan Banker from Punctuation.com, a small advisory service focusing on helping small to medium-sized firms understand the value and how they're building value within their firms for ultimately an exit. Jonathan, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
This is one of the questions that I have had for a very long time. You know, I've always loved doing marketing. I love working with people and the experience of being in an agency. And as I get older, thoughts cross my mind of like, hey, is what I'm working on worth something? You know, because at the end of the day, I don't want to waste my time. And so how do I do things in my agency to create the most amount of value for maybe an exit one day?
That's a big question. And it depends a little bit on the type of firm you're running, but I'll paint in broad strokes and then we can go deeper if you want. So the first is to be well positioned. If you think about who the buyers are of firms kind of between 2 and 20 million in revenue, it's generally going to be larger firms. Those larger firms are usually going to be more full service. And so when they are out there looking for firms to acquire, what they are trying to acquire is deep expertise, not necessarily more broad experience. And so they want to buy firms that are well positioned. Maybe that's, depth in a particular vertical with a particular set of clients. Maybe it's, a firm that specializes in only selling on Amazon or only working with HubSpot, or, it could be a number of things, but that's the first thing they look at. Beyond that, profitability matters a lot more than top line revenue. Your processes matter. And, I think processes are a lot of ways a proxy for how dependent the firm is on the owner or founders. So when they're buying a firm, they want to make sure that this is something that when the founder steps away, they'll still be able to run and grow. New business processes in particular are something that they're looking really closely at.
And so what I've just heard you say is, like, if someone were building an agency today, they may want to build it around specialization because it might make it more attractive to one of these large agencies looking to bolt on a capability versus just provide additional support or backup for their generalists that they already have.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a little bit counterintuitive, but, because positioning with a specialty does narrow the pool of buyers, but it makes you much more attractive to that smaller pool of buyers because you're, one of 5 potential options versus one of 200 potential options.
That almost sounds risky in itself, though, from the agency standpoint, because if you put all your eggs in one basket, you are potentially reducing your diversity of types of clients or maybe the things you're working on. So it is kind of an interesting dichotomy there, because you've got in one way you are making yourself more attractive, but in other ways it's more risky to be that way.
And it depends, right? So we work with some hospitality agencies, and during COVID, that was a rough time for hospitality, and so yes, it can be very risky. But in other ways, if you do have deep expertise in a certain area, that's when you can start to command higher prices. Maybe it's higher hourly rates, or maybe you're doing value-based pricing. And so you're able to build stronger cash cushions to help kind of weather those storms.
Yeah. I'm kind of thinking, as you're talking through the types of agencies, and you mentioned hospitality, it sort of occurred to me with a lot of the AI tools that are out there, I would imagine content, creative writing agencies are more difficult, are experiencing more difficulty right now. Maybe even with some of the coolest tools I've seen lately, where you can write custom music very easily using AI tools, and the music is actually quite good, and it's sung quite well, and the the beats are quite, catchy. And so maybe some of the custom music places are getting a little bit, infringed on in terms of their value as well right now.
I think the whole idea of content marketing is certainly up in the air right now. AI is definitely disrupting that industry. We haven't necessarily seen prices for those types of agencies go down yet. I think there's still a lot to figure out, but I do think that everyone's antennas are up, and it's kind of something is going to happen.
So let's talk through a little bit. If you're an agency owner, if you're somebody looking to start your own agency, what are the types of things that you ought to be planning on if you're looking to have an exit, let's say in 5 years? Like, what are the best things you can do? Does it make sense for them to go out and engage a firm like yours that early, or what are the timing and the steps that should be looked into?
So, I mean, it might make sense to engage someone like us early, but only if it's kind of on the advisory and building your business side, not on the getting ready to sell side. A lot of things that you do to build a good business are the same things that would make a business sellable. So at the outset, you want to build a business that is run well, but is also not entirely dependent on you, particularly in new business. And so that takes time, right? If you're starting out, usually all new business is going to run through the founder for the first few years. But you have to have kind of the future in mind and say, okay, at what point do we need to start building kind of an inbound engine here? Is that blog posts? Is that a podcast? Is that speaking engagements? And depending on what that looks like for me, how much of that can I start kind of parsing out to other smart folks in the agency to make sure that I'm not the only one with my hands on it?
Yeah, I mean, it creates a much more sustainable situation as well. I mean, what if the founder wants to go on vacation for a month? Does that mean all sales activities stop?
Yeah, God forbid the founder want to go on vacation.
Yeah, I mean, that is crazy talk, but yeah. So anyhow, in terms of like the services that a firm like yours provides, it's on the advisory side. So it really is something that I would imagine you'd want to engage with them early on, so that way your structures are in place, and all those pieces. And something you mentioned earlier about the biz dev, I would imagine if you happen to specialize, you might find it easier to do business development because, number one, you can be more targeted and focused with your marketing and advertising efforts for your own firm, but also even finding those people. Like if you are, let's say, a really intelligent founder of an agency, not thinking of anybody in particular, but you might have a deeper understanding of certain topics, where somebody coming in from the outside, they might be able to become much more versed and get much deeper with their knowledge and be able to be more effective in selling it more easily if you're not specializing in everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you specialize in real estate, for example, you can much more easily find who are the big real estate development companies. Okay, that's my target. And then you also know exactly what type of information is going to appeal to them. So it is certainly easier to build a business development plan. And once you start getting a few wins under your belt, it kind of gives you then, now you have case studies, right? So it's easier to sell future work.
Yeah. I've heard stories from friends of mine who have been agency leaders over the years, and sometimes when a purchase happens, they are able to just walk away, and sometimes they have to stay and do something called an earn-out. Can you give us an idea on what factors are in play when it comes to those scenarios?
Yeah, those both happen, and it depends a lot on the buyer. So, you might have, of the pool of buyers, you've got other agencies, you've got individual investors and operators who might just want to come in and run a firm. You've got smaller private equity, family offices, and then folks trying to do roll-ups. And there are some instances where, the acquiring firm wants the owner out as soon as possible. We've got a firm under LOI right now that we're representing, and the founder who is selling her business will only be required for 30 days after the sale. But I would say the vast majority of deals have some kind of earn-out process where the sellers are required to stay for 2 to 3 years is probably about average, and they get payouts based on hitting certain performance targets or just for being around and working. And so the entire purchase price is not paid up front. It's kind of a portion up front based on the risk profile of the business, and then a portion over time based on the earnout structure.
What are some examples of what a common earnout would look like?
Again, every deal is different, but I'll say an average is probably 40 to 50% upfront in cash, and then the remaining 50 to 60% pay it out over 3 years in kind of equal chunks based on hitting top line revenue targets or EBITDA targets, or retaining a key client if you've got kind of one gorilla client, something like that.
That all makes sense. I would imagine, obviously, those are the types of things that return value to the buyer.
That's exactly right.
So what are some other options besides selling? Like, how would you plan for succession?
So there are certainly other options besides selling. One is an internal sale, which is technically a sale. It's just very different because you're selling to someone who usually doesn't have a ton of money and does understand the culture and the clients already. And so those sales can be very good culturally, but usually aren't going to be as lucrative for the seller. And oftentimes they'll play out over longer periods of time because you're kind of waiting for chunks of money to come in. Other options are for a principal to simply kind of delegate as much as they can over time and then collect dividends if they can find someone who wants to run the day-to-day but doesn't want to own the company, doesn't want to assume the associated risk. Those are tough relationships to find, but if you can find one, they can work out very well.
Yeah, because you're basically building an annuity for yourself forever as long as the business is humming along.
Right. I mean, what we see sometimes is that over time, that annuity will kind of slowly decline. The firm in general slowly declines without, the owner's hand. Someone who no one's going to care more than the owner. And if that person has stepped away and is clearly not coming back, then kind of firm quality can decline, firm culture can decline, and so you can slowly lose that annuity, but sometimes it's still a smart financial decision.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he had sold his agency a few years ago, and I asked him, shortly after he sold his agency, I said, why did you decide to sell it at that point? And his answer to me was, when he looked at all the factors, well, overall he was pretty tired. Just in general, he was pretty tired. And in dealing with a lot of the agency issues it can be very complex and draining on somebody, but they had lost some of their fire and their passion for it. But they felt like at that moment, based off the market forces, that their agency was worth as much as it was going to be worth for a while. And so that's why they decided to sell at that point. What are those things that go into helping to understand timing of a sale?
There's two sides. There's understanding your firm, and then there's understanding the market in general. Understanding your firm is really a lot about understanding your own capacity to continue growing the agency. And so if you see, you had a killer year, next year, you just don't know how you're going to get there again or top it. Without, significant investment, which just sounds awful to you, like emotionally draining, then that would be a sign that you might want to sell. The other side of that is how is the M&A market going, and is it a buyer's market or is it a seller's market, and what are kind of firms trading for in terms of EBITDA multiples. And that is much harder, I think, to predict and certainly time, because this all happens kind of in annual cycles, right? You kind of need, last year's full numbers before you can really go to market with those numbers.
Yeah. And so you mentioned emotionally draining. Sometimes it can be emotionally draining just to continue, but this process itself can be emotionally stressful. A lot of times people have a lot of pride over what they've created, and they might think it's worth a lot more than it really is.
We definitely run into that. Yeah. So one of the first things we do is evaluation of the firm, and we're, pretty honest about how a buyer is going to look at their firm, what they're going to like and what they might not like so much. But even beyond that, selling a company is a lot like buying a house. And so you're walking into all these new houses, and every time you walk into a new house, you're trying it on in your mind, and you're saying, what would it be like to live here? What would it be like to have my stuff here? And then the further you go down a path with a potential buyer, the kind of more, real those thoughts become. But the problem is you're having multiple conversations at the same time. And so it can just be emotionally draining to try to picture yourself in all of these different scenarios, and most of them are not going to pan out.
Yeah. It is a very stressful time. I mean, even like you were saying, selling a house. But this is something that might even be much more deeply personal. I mean, it's literally something you've dedicated your life to, and you've spent more time than even with your own family at work, and in building all of everything that goes into what happens with an agency. What are some of the most important things that someone can do as a primary in an agency along the way to create the most amount of value as they are starting to turn towards thinking about selling?
So one of the things we advise our clients to do early on is to make sure that you have really clean books, that your P&L and your balance sheet are looking good. Your chart of accounts makes sense. You aren't running huge personal expenses through the business, or really any personal expenses if you can help it. There's a lot of kind of tax avoidance stuff that sometimes gets lumped into these P&Ls and balance sheets that can just make it trickier to sell a firm when you're having to explain every little line item.
It's like, no, it's profitable. I just do that for taxes.
Yeah, exactly. Wait. No, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
There's the sheer amount of money that you're making that would probably make the biggest difference. And I think things start to change for you once you can get above 1 million or so in EBITDA. And I'm kind of using that term to be synonymous with net income, because usually they're pretty close in our industry. So once you get above 1 million, that's when you kind of open up into a new pool of buyers that are more interested. Specialization certainly matters. Having a strong leadership team matters. Having good processes in place matters. And and making sure that you have a really solid client base. Hopefully you've got no client that's, more than 25% or so of your total client billings. That would be ideal. To the extent you can kind of recurring revenue stream, and I'm going to use air quotes there. If you've got folks on kind of monthly retainers, that's great. If you're a branding and identity firm, that's kind of impossible because you're just working on projects. But if it is possible, that's something great to shoot for.
Yeah. What about your employees themselves? So how do the differences between having a huge group of contractors versus having full-time employees, like what kind of a difference would that make?
Having, I would say employees are more important than contractors to a buyer because they feel more stable. But having access to a strong contractor base, particularly if you are requiring kind of, specialized skill sets, can also be beneficial. So having contractors is not a no-no. But running an entire agency with only contractors, that would make it tough to sell. You kind of need to be at the, 10 plus people mark before buyers stop asking too many questions about like, well, how am I going to run this thing if you're gone?
Yeah, that makes sense. What about the culture and benefits and things like that? Like, what should you be thinking of as an agency owner in terms of the type of group you're trying to and the culture inside of your agency?
I wouldn't think about culture and benefits as something that helps get you to sell. I would think of that as more of, you want to match culture to your personality and you want to treat your employees right. And all of that will matter to a buyer. Now, one of the big things that you're kind of looking for when you are shopping around for a buyer is cultural fit. But that's not necessarily something you can plan for. It's something that just kind of happens. Do I think I could work with this person long term? Do we have similar views on business or, our philosophy of life?
Well, I've heard it described as like, for example, I know some professional services firms that have been involved in roll-ups, and the group doing the roll-up was only looking at firms that used the EOS or traction method of management. Therefore, they had a better chance of the culture being a fit.
Yeah, that's a great way to do that. If you can find something like EOS, we've had good success if we have a selling company that runs EOS with buyers that are familiar with EOS, because it just cuts back on a lot of the how do you think about business type of questions, because exactly how they're running things.
How about debt? How does that factor in it? Like in terms of whether or not somebody has large lines of credit, maybe they don't use them or use them. Like, so what about access to debt as well as using debt?
Access to debt doesn't really matter. Using debt. So most of these deals are actually done on a cash-free, debt-free basis. So the company buying the firm will buy based on the P&L, but the balance sheet basically follows the seller. So if you've got a ton of debt on your balance sheet, you're going to have to pay that out of your earnings of the sale before you can kind of walk away. I would say in our industry, having a ton of debt is usually a pretty big red flag because it isn't a very capital intensive industry.
Right.
And so usually it doesn't require large sums of money to kind of grow and scale something.
One final question. One of the things that I've heard, and I know it's a very common practice, especially when you get into like altruistic leaders, but sometimes they might pay themselves less in order to give back more to the company to get to a point. But at time of sale, how does that factor in? Like I've heard that, For example, let's say the founder should be making $300,000 based off of what the size of the firm, but they really only pay themselves 100. So how does that impact the selling value?
That is a great point. And it certainly does impact the selling value. The way that any sophisticated buyer is going to evaluate your firm, they're going to look at what is the replacement market rate of you as an owner. So when we are doing evaluation of a firm, that is one of the key adjustments we make is what are you paying yourself versus what you should be paying yourself. And then we're going to either add or subtract to your net income based on that. But you're certainly not going to get credit for underpaying yourself. And if you are overpaying yourself, you will get credit for the difference there, as long as you're not kind of expecting that amount of money in perpetuity.
It sounds like that would be the better side to err on if you were overpaying yourself, because they're going to save money after they buy you.
We advise our clients, there is harm in underpaying yourself, usually around just kind of lying to yourself about how profitable you are, which can change the way that you make decisions. There is no downside to overpaying yourself.
Oh, all right. I lied. Well, there's one more question. What about if you have partners? So I'm imagining that having fewer partners is better for a buyer because it's less people to deal with.
Not necessarily. Having more partners usually means that those folks are in different stages of wanting out of the business. And so you might have a partner that's nearing retirement age and they want out as soon as possible. And that might be more possible because you've got, two other partners who still have a lot of gas left in the tank. So I would say that's kind of on an individual basis, but it's not any harder or easier to sell a firm based on the number of partners.
Well, this has been really educational day. Any final thoughts on advice you would give people with professional services firms or agencies that they should be thinking about or doing as they consider what their next options in life are?
If you want to talk more, reach out. We set up a little web page just for your listeners, punctuation.com/LOR, Law of Relevancy, LOR. So, advice is usually best given on an individualized basis, but we're happy to give it.
Well, that's great. And where can we follow your advice and your thought leadership?
Go to our website, punctuation.com, and you'll see kind of the first thing above the fold is a way to subscribe to our newsletter. We put out a ton of free weekly insights. That's just kind of our way of letting you guys know who we are and how we think. Choosing someone to help you navigate this is a lot like choosing a therapist. So, we're not right for everyone, but we are right for some people. And so that's kind of a good way to figure out if we are thinking similarly.
So if you want somebody that listens to vinyl and has a cool dog, think about Jonathan Baker. And
yeah, my dog is aggressively grooming in the background here.
That's awesome. Well, anyhow, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Jonathan, and thank you for your insights. That's very valuable information you share with us today. And you can follow us anywhere where podcasts are found. You can also follow us on the Bake More Pies social media feeds, as well as the lawofrelevancy.com. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.